It's a tricky one. Putting Baby Reindeer to one side. Obviously, when you're doing things based on real life, you need to look at um, what the factual issues are. So, is what you are saying or what you're portraying based on fact? If so, that gives you some protection against things like lawsuits alleging that, you're saying this about this particular person or character. It gets trickier when it's fiction adapted from truth, which is what happened with Baby Reindeer, because the argument there is, well, this is based on real events. It's not an actual depiction of a true story. And things start getting a bit more complex ethically. I mean, Netflix and Richard Gard have said that they went to great lengths to hide the identities of all of the people involved. The extent to which that's true is debatable, given the lawsuit that's now come out. And it's not the first lawsuit that Netflix has been faced with either when dealing with real people.
Yes, that's interesting, and we'll talk more about that in a moment. But the caveat, as you point out, now Richard Gad, we should point out, is the writer and star. He is the actual character that this sort of fictionalized account happened to. He was a bit disingenuous. Yeah. Based on, true events, but please don't hunt down these real-life people. But we know that in reality, whenever based on true events pops up on a series, we're immediately going to Google to find out who these people are, how did it all play out.
Of course, that's human nature. And creators can say until they're blue in the face, don't do this. People are going to, we know that. It's also slightly disingenuous that the trailer for Baby Reindeer, the introduction a few minutes into the first episode, clearly says this is a true story. It's not until the very end of the credits that we get this is based on real events, but we have dramatised it in some way. So there's this blurring of reality and fiction that's also going on that adds to that confusion and adds to that sense of, well, what really happened? We want to get to the bottom of it. We want to find out the truth of this story.
So then comes the twist. The real-life Martha declares herself and says, I'm the one at the centre of this. She goes on Piers Morgan and does this big interview denying all of this. How often do you see this happen?
Not very often. And again, this is where Baby Reindeer, I think, is quite different to things like Inventing Anna, because those depicted real people. Baby Reindeer depicts Donnie and Martha. They're not using the names Richard. They're not using the names Fiona. Fans have obviously gone onto the internet. They've looked for text because that text appears in the show. So we're getting things like different messages sent from my iPhone, which comes through in every single episode. So fans have started to search out that content. They found it on Fiona Harvey's Twitter. You could still make the argument that she's not necessarily the character portrayed. It could be, an amalgamation of different people. But then when she comes out and says, well, you were basing this on me, but that's not me. But I'm going to go and talk to Piers Morgan. I'm going to do these interviews. That becomes a bit... It's unusual and it's complex because she's also kind of outing herself as well. Like, if she'd kept quiet and said, well, actually, this is not me, people have found my Twitter, they've got it a bit wrong, you could kind of do a bit of damage control. You could have that distance from the text. But coming out and saying, yes, this is the person that is in the show, but also I'm not that person.
So I'm interested in, having watched this, and as you pointed out earlier, Netflix has been sued before. How do you think it's going to play out?
What's happened previously? So Netflix has tried to dismiss lawsuits. It's very recently lost the bid to dismiss the lawsuit against Inventing Anna, for example. It did settle out of court actually the day before Fiona Harvey's lawsuit was fight to settle this one, just because the sheer amount of money that Fiona Harvey is asking is an incredible amount. But I think they are going to have to look going forward about how they address these issues. There's obviously only a limited amount you can do to stop audience activity and to prevent audiences from searching out these people. But is there something more that Netflix and other producers should be doing to hide those identities better? Because otherwise, potentially, it's going to get really costly for them. And that's money that could go into better producing content.
And, these semi-fictionalised true stories are hugely popular. So, you know, they're big cash spinners for Netflix and streaming services, as we've seen by the amount of people who've watched it. I wondered too whether Fiona Harvey, who is a lawyer essentially by trade, did she see this as an opportunity to cash in, and that could even complicate things?
Potentially. I do get the sense that there is an increase in kind of litigious nature in relation to a lot of entertainment. Particularly when it's adapting true stories or based on real people. The general population might not know what to do if they are the people that are being discussed. With Fiona Harvey having a background in law, she clearly knows what to say in order to prove defamation or alleged defamation. It's certainly a possibility, and it's potentially a very easy cash grab for her. If Netflix are already settling with current lawsuits, it's kind of odds on that they're going to settle with this one. So that could be a nice few million potentially in your pocket.
Yeah. It is interesting. You know, how much of is truth a defence? It appears that there is a history with Fiona Harvey with previous employers. You'd think that Netflix might have ascertained or checked the veracity of some of the claims made in there, because they're extraordinary claims, like 37,000 emails that she sent. You know, could that if there is some truth, is a kernel of truth in all of that, could that be a defence for them?
Potentially, and I think this is where we come in from it with the true story versus based on a true story argument. If something is based on a true story, you can take it further. You can play around with the truth. You can build up a better narrative. And that's clearly what they're arguing that they've done in Baby Reindeer. The real Martha, Fiona Harvey, never went to prison. What she's doing, though, is arguing that that's defamation because the character in the show went to prison. And that's where it becomes a bit blurred, because if the character in the show went to prison, that's not a real event. But how then does it become a source of defamation? And I think that becomes really, really complex. And it's something I think it's going to start coming out more often, and it's something that content creators are going to have to really look into and work out, well, how do we address these things before they become a problem?
Yeah, and it, you know, it's interesting because it sort of settles in people's minds as facts, even though the minute you've got this is based on, and you know, even if it's an amalgamation, it's sort of, even like if you think about The Crown and how many people now think that was what happened to the royal family, that's in their minds the truth of the matter. So it's a murky area, isn't it?
It really is. There's a lot of ethical, legal, moral issues that are really coming out now, whereas, you know, 10, 20 years ago, these wouldn't have even been considerations.
Bethan, love it. Thank you so much for helping us make sense of it all.
You're welcome.